Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here on this really gross day where I live. It's rainy, it's gray, it's cold. I'm wearing shorts because it had been warm over the week, heading into the weekend, and then finally yesterday it just got really cold again. But I'm still wearing shorts because I'm holding out hope. You gotta hope. And I am working here surrounded by puppies. I've got Jamie over here, Guinness over here. So, you can see my bookcase in the background, so I figured this is a nice enough backdrop. I'm just going to stay where I am and do a haul revisit because that's what we're here to do today. Anyway, there are 6 books to talk about today, and this is another whiff for me because 5 of those books were new to me, and you will see I haven't read any of them. So my track record on book haul revisits is not so good, but I have plans to get to some of these. Let's talk about the books individually. The first one is the one I had already read, Catch 22. As I was doing book hauls early last year and I was spending a lot more time going through my shelves than usual, so I noticed I don't have a copy of Catch 22. And actually, the main thing that made me realize I didn't have a copy of Catch 22 was that I talked about literary adaptations from last year, and one of them was the Catch 22 series from George Clooney that went on Hulu. I wanted to make sure I had a copy because I had been planning to watch the series, and I was vaguely thinking of rereading it before I watched the show. Well, I didn't reread it, and I only ever watched, I think, the first 2 episodes of the show, and it was good, it was fine. I just didn't follow along for whatever reason. So it's kind of a whiff on both points. But I have actually read this book before. The thing is just that I read it before I ever purchased it. I don't know what happened to my copy of it, that I had to buy another one last year. Still have absolutely no idea. I probably misplaced it in a move somewhere along the way, but I have a copy now for whenever I get back to it. I remember this is traditionally what I call one of my favorite books of all time. I remember really loving it when I've read it and it being funny and sad and dramatic. So, but it is something that I feel like I should reread because I read it when I was maybe 21, somewhere in that zip code, and I am 38 now. Actually, I'm not yet, technically. So I do this weird thing. In about 3 or 4 months before I have a birthday, I start calling myself the new age that I'm about to turn. I'm 37 until next month. So that's neither here nor there. You don't need to know that. But I sometimes remind myself, like, slow down. So anyway, just the point being, it's been almost 20 years since I read this book. So I feel like I should give it a reread now that I'm at a different point in my life and see if it holds up. And if it's still something that I would like. And part of my reading goal to read outside your comfort zone is to reread a book that I previously loved and maybe reread a book that I previously hated and reconsider them. So this would be a candidate for that, but I think I have a different idea for what I want to do for that. And you're just going to have to stay tuned on what that is or might be. So that was the first book. And again, to sum up, I didn't read it last year, but I had already read it when I brought it in, and this was much more, the point behind the purchase was much more that this is a book I want to have on my shelf because it is something that I love and like to have around and look at. It's even got a pretty spine. So for that, it's doing great. The next one, when I was at my library sells used books, so I saw these 2 books by John Updike. There's Rabbit Run and Rabbit Redux, and if you follow along at all, you know that I am doing a Pulitzer Prize project. I want to read every book that has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. Originally it was called the Pulitzer Prize for the novel, but so these are not Pulitzer Prize winners. However, John Updike is one of the now 4 authors who has won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction twice, and both of those books were for the other 2 books in the Rabbit series. So even though these aren't Pulitzer Prize winners, I figured I'm trying to be thorough about that project, so I figure if I'm going to read later books in this series, I should think about reading the other ones as well. I believe, don't quote me on this, Rabbit Run is the first book that follows Harry Rabbit Angstrom. Rabbit Redux is either the second or the third. The ones he won a Pulitzer for are Rabbit is Rich and Rabbit at Rest. I believe Rabbit at Rest is obviously the final book, and Rabbit is Rich is either the second or the third. I think it might be the second. But again, Don't quote me on that because I don't have it in front of me. John Updike, if you followed along, you know, is not an author I'm really super looking forward to reading, but I feel like I should read so I can talk about him with authority. I also feel like he was someone who, for a time, kind of embodied the American literary canon. So maybe that's overstating things a little bit, but I feel like because of that reputation, I feel like I should definitely read his books. So I don't know if I'm going to read all 4 books in the series, but I definitely want to try to start with the first book in the series. There's a tricky thing where some books that won a Pulitzer are either later in a series or started a series. So for instance, Lonesome Dove. I did not realize until I was already reading it that it is actually the 3rd installment. But then I looked into it and found out that Lonesome Dove actually was published first, and then Larry McMurtry wrote, I think, 3 other books, 2 prequels, and then a sequel. So because they came later, I don't feel obligated to read those. But these were actually published in order, so I kind of feel like I should do it. And look at, again, this being me, rules are made to be broken. So when it comes to, say, Upton Sinclair and the Lanny Budd novels, I don't think I'm going to be rereading all of those before I get to the one that won the Pulitzer. But for these, I'm at least thinking about it, and I have them on my shelf, and I haven't read them because I'm a little bit reluctant to read John Updike. But I'm going to get to them, and, you know, I'm trying to really prioritize for the second half of the year things I want to do for my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, and one of these, probably the first one, is probably going to be on there. So stay tuned for that. Let me slide these in next to Jamie. Next one, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. I believe I've known about this book for a really, really long time. But what really sparked my attention was that last year I did the Pick a Year book tag, and of course I did the year I was born, which is 1982. And I believe this was published in 1982. Let's double check that. Copyright 1980 and 1982. So because this is stories, I'm going to assume that the 1982 is the publishing in, you know, this format. So that is how it got me to examine the book, and I didn't know that it had an LGBTQ element until I did that book tag, and that really kind of, I had been interested in reading this book, but that kind of prioritized it a lot. And what's funny is, in my book haul for May of 2019, I mentioned that I wanted to read this in June, because in June I try to prioritize LGBTQ books. Obviously that didn't happen. As you know, I suck at TBRs. In my defense, even in that video, I mentioned that I suck at TBRs. So it's probably no surprise that I didn't get to it. I really do want to, and I'm thinking about doing it in June as well, especially since it's a short book. So I'm hoping to use June to get to this and the next book, which is Amateur, A Reckoning with Gender Identity and Masculinity by Thomas Page McBee. This same thing. I was really interested in the topic. Last year, my reading goal was to read more LGBTQ books that focus on the L, B, T, and Q. And this obviously would have fit in with the T. So I really wanted to get to it, and I still want to get to it, but I didn't get to it in June. So maybe in June, I think I'm much more likely to try to get to the Women of Brewster Place. I am also planning a buddy read of Girl, Woman, Other in June, so I will finally get to that book. And in a month where it kind of translates into LGBTQ. Just the reading that I will be doing in the month. But I do want to get to this as well. I think there was another one by Isabel B. That I'm thinking of fitting in. I have too many books that I want to read in June, is what I'm saying. And I think Amateur is probably the one that would slide first, which is a shame because I do want to read it. But they are both still very much on my TBR, and I want to read them. And then we get to the final book, The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. Now, I picked this up because I found it in my local used bookstore, and I've always wanted to read it, so I just kind of grabbed it. And now it actually fits with my reading goal for this year, Read Outside Your Comfort Zone. Part of that is to read more books by authors who are not from North America or Europe. So I want to make sure I hit a book from every continent other than Antarctica, of course. I could be flippant and read Where'd You Go, Bernadette, where they go to Antarctica, but I've already read that book and I don't want to read it again. So this is definitely one I want to get to represent South America. This was another book that I talked about in the Choose the Year book tag, and I think that's why when I saw it in my local used bookstore, it was top of mind. So I made sure I grabbed it, and now it just happens to fit in with my goals. So this is probably a book that I am going to try to get to for sure in the second half of 2020. I'm looking forward to it. I've heard a lot of mixed things about Isabel Allende's newer books, but consensus seems to be that her older books are really good, worth reading, and House of the Spirits is one that I've been really wanting to get to for a very long time. South American authors are, it's a group that I really need to do better about. Basically, I've read Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Mario Vargas Llosa, and that's it. So, but that's part of the reasoning behind my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge. I want to discover more things like Isabel Allende, hopefully, and she has a lot of other books, so hopefully there will be a lot of other ones. Like there's Eva Luna and things like that. So if I enjoyed this one, which is a little chunky, hopefully there will be lots of other places that I can go. Yeah, it's about 500 pages. So anyway, there you go. Those are the 6 books that I brought into my library in May 2019. As I mentioned, didn't do a great job getting to all of them in the last year, but they are still very much books, other than Catch-22, which I would like to reread someday, but on a much lower priority than any of the other books. So they are still books that I want to get to. I'm going to keep them on my shelves, keep them around. I don't see any reason to get rid of these. I think I will be getting to them. So yeah, no tough decisions here. They're all going to stick around, and hopefully I'll be getting to them soon. We shall see. So anyway, if you've read any of these and have some wisdom about what I should prioritize before some of the others, I would love to hear that. If you have recommendations based on these, let me know. If you just have general thoughts about, I don't know, Gloria Naylor or John Updike or Isabel Allende, are her new books as bad as I've heard? Let me know that as well. You know what to do. Drop all of that stuff in the comments down below, just down there. And as always, thank you for your time. I really, 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 really appreciate it, especially if you have enjoyed this enough to subscribe and follow along on whatever it is I do here. And as always, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.